When I started working here, I learned about the fact that a lot of the Hawaiian crops, taro, bananas, yams, sugarcane, had their origins in New Guinea, or that they were actually being farmed in an early agricultural center in New Guinea. And that somehow or another, that really caught my imagination, this idea that we were part of a agricultural tradition that didn't start in the Fertile Crescent. It started in, of all places, the highlands of New Guinea. So I've always been interested in looking at the past and how the plants got here. And of course, you know, I've learned a lot about the Austronesian people too, and they have such a role. So tonight we're going to talk about how the plants got here and where they came from and who brought them here. Let's see. Try. Oops! How'd that happen? Wow. That was weird. Oh, here we are. We're still here. Oh, I'm still here though. Okay. Whew. Okay. There. Okay. Good. So this is a list of Polynesian introduced plants. I think Jill brought one in too in her talk, and this is about the same. I think there's 24 plants on here. You probably know most of them. Most of them are in the garden. There's only 2 exceptions that are not here now. There's another 3 or 4 plants that are kind of obscure and we don't know about too much, or we don't hear about very much. They may have been accidental introductions, and there are also some plants that were probably brought here by the Hawaiians, but there were also native plants that are growing here anyway. And hala is a famous example like that, but also maybe hau and milo. So you can see lists that don't exactly coincide with this, but this gives you an idea. You know, these are the plants. These are the core of Hawaiian agriculture and Hawaiian culture in general. There are 2 plants on here that are. All the rest of them are from Asia, and that's what we'll be talking about tonight. The plants from Asia. There's 2 plants that are not from Asia. Can anybody know what they are? Oh, the these are the right here, the Polynesian introduced plants. The ones the Hawaiians brought. Ipu, and the other one's a real easy one. Everybody knows the other one. Uala. That's right. Ipu and Uala are both, and they are both from tropical America, of all things. So that's a whole other fascinating story. But tonight we're going to look at the ones from Asia. This is a really cool map. I'm going to come back to it later in the presentation, and we can go over it a little bit more. But just to give you an idea of the Austronesians brought the plants from Southeast Asia into Hawaii, and they brought a lot of these plants all over the world. So you can see how far they went from Madagascar to Rapa Nui, you know, and probably all the way to South America. This is, I think I just measured it out. It's like a 210 degrees of longitude. It's just an amazing span that these amazing people coming from the island of Taiwan, from really the southern tip of the island of Taiwan, and then boom, and all these places that are colored on here on the map, they now speak Austronesian languages. So it's one of the most widespread language families in the world. So there's a great, they're just an amazing story, and we'll talk about it a bit more here as we go along. Just a few words that I'll be using are things that you may see, especially if you get interested and start reading about these. Here's this one word called BP, before the present, because for one thing, it's a little bit awkward with BC and AD because there's kind of a cultural bias in that, built into that. But the thing about BP, and I didn't know this until I was getting ready for this thing. By P they mean 1950, and you know. So okay, well, that's kind of the present, but it's because it's based on.
Works for me.
Yeah. I can relate.
Yeah.
But it's based on radiocarbon dates, and this is when radiocarbon dating became, came into general use in about this time. And so they set a certain date for that. Because you can't have it moving or else you'll start losing accuracy. And for radiocarbon dates, accuracy is a big thing. There's also Ka or Kya, this is thousands of years ago. And that is usually, you're measuring things in thousands of years. You don't usually doesn't get too precise. Only if somebody writes a really immortal research paper that lasts for 500 years, people will have to start doing some math to figure out what they were talking about by KY or KYA. There's also, I ran across MA, I don't think you'll see that much, but that's 1 million years ago. ISEA, I probably won't say this, but when you read, you see it all the time. It's a shorthand acronym for Island Southeast Asia. You also see sometimes MSEA, Mainland Southeast Asia. So in a lot of what we're dealing with today, Island Southeast Asia is the stage for a lot of these things. These ones all are terms that define ages or eras. And the first two are from geology. Pleistocene, the ice ages, about the last 2 million years. And then Holocene is the period since the last warming up we had, which is about 12,000 years ago. The action we're talking about today takes place in the late Pleistocene, in the early Holocene, and mid-Holocene. Neolithic is also used, and some of the articles talk about in terms of Neolithic. This is from anthropology and history. And it really, the way it works, really works better for the cereal agriculture. It's really about the development of growing crops like they did in the Levant or in in the Fertile Crescent, and so it's certainly applied a lot to the stories we're talking about today. But to me, most of the times we'll just talk about the Holocene and when it happened in the Holocene. The area where all these plants came from is in a floristic realm, which is, the world is divided. No talking. The area, the world is divided into floristic realms, and there's a lot of debate about where they really are. But Indo-Malaysian floristic realm, and anybody actually knows how to pronounce that second word? I actually asked Google, and the Google guy, which is probably a robot, said Malaysian, and I thought that just doesn't sound right, Malaysian. So I'm going to stick with Malaysian, and sometimes I'll shift over to Malaysian, which kind of similar, but but it is this floristic realm. There are really two. I wanted to have a chance to use the. Oops! Oh shoot! I did the wrong thing. Go back. I wanted to have a chance to use the pointer, the laser pointer. So there really is a choke point, and there's really kind of two separate realms in a way, but there's enough communication between. So there's about 50% of the plants that are shared, native plants. So it means same native plants in all this area. And this is talking about way before humans had anything to do with anything. So this is a botanical thing. But there's a choke point over here. Because the Himalayan mountains come down there, and then down here, these floodplains of the Irrawaddy and Brahmaputra rivers, which are just these, hundreds of miles of islands and wetlands. So it's a real barrier to plants in a way, but especially humans. So once the humans got over here, there wasn't any kind of flow of humans across that area, because it's a pretty rough area. There's mountains in Myanmar and dense jungle through there too. But that is the way that humans did get into here. So, and I think we're going to look at the humans next here. We got to talk about a little bit Sundaland and Sahol. And these are terms for biogeographical zones. It's not really too clear up here. It's clear on the computer screen, but the shaded areas are areas that are during the glacial maximums, during the iciest parts of the ice ages, would be exposed and would be land. And so actually this whole area, which is now Sumatra, Java, Borneo, that was all one big peninsula. And you could walk from one side to the other. And you could even, there was even land bridge up to the Philippines, a couple of land bridges. And also Australia and New Guinea were joined by land too. The sea level dropped over 300 feet, which is, considerable. And I think that shelf is about 300 feet deep. So it started to thaw about 20,000 years ago, but it didn't really finish thawing out and reach the present levels until about 6,000 years ago. So for a long time, there was a lot less distance between islands, and sometimes there were no islands at all, where there are now islands. So this is one theory about how humans came into this part of the world. And let's see if I can find, oh yeah, here we are. I'm really getting into these things. So this wanted to kind of highlight this part of the map, which is our area in here. Here's India, and here's that little choke point I was talking about. So this happened about between 70 and 50,000 years ago. So quite distant past, but these are when modern humans came into into Southeast Asia and island Southeast Asia. And there are two branches. There's actually a third branch that went down and populated South India. And then one branch came, look at my little pointer thing, don't I? Oh, no, I don't. One branch came down here. These are the Austronesians. And the Austronesians, they include the first Australians. So in this group that migrated down here, the first Australians went all the way to Australia. But also the Papuans and the Melanesians. And they're in where are we here? Yeah, here's New Guinea. And then there's also a third group, and I'm calling them other Australasians. There's a lot of difference about what that third group is, and they are separate, distinct people without a single culture that kind of links them together. They're hard to describe, but they were not Papuan. They didn't speak Papuan, and Melanesian languages are related, and their cultures are related. These people were distinct, but they populated all those islands, and they're all over the place. They're even in Taiwan. And a lot of these people persisted until the present. So they're a part of the story, but not much is known about them, and it's hard to generalize about them too. But then there's this group here, and these came into Asia, and the Austroasiatic. Unfortunately there's three different terms that are used in this all over the place, and just can't get past them. One is Australasians, one is Austroasiatic, one is Austronesians, and they all sound kind of similar. And I even get confused with them sometimes. But anyway, the Austroasiatic speakers, and I'm not sure of all these. There's a lot of things I don't really know, but they came in this wave and settled in this area down here, and they're a big part of our story here too. So remember, we're talking about 50,000 years ago.
And that area is China? Is that right?
Yes, China. So there's also Vietnam and Laos and Myanmar, but China, I think that's that. Vietnam stops about here, and then it gets up here is China.
That's all South China.
South China, yeah. And there's there were other migrations too that are not part of this that came later. Some that came from this side in here, and especially people in China, but didn't really interact down in here until after the Austronesians, or when the Austronesians came. So it was, what's kind of neat about this thing is interesting is that it was kind of a closed system set apart from the rest of the world. And once we had the stage here all set and we got the actors come in, and then for 50,000 years they're kind of apart from the rest of the world. It wasn't really till the Austronesians came in that they became in contact with the rest of the world. And that, you know, unlike how, you know, they didn't bring the world didn't come to them. They went out to the world. You know, the Austronesians took all this culture from here out all over the world. That big, you saw the map of where all they went. So I'm going to talk about 3 different sites from really ancient sites. And this is Nia Caves. It's in Indonesia. I don't know, or it's in Malaysia. I don't know if anybody has been to that, but it's a huge cave. It's not right on the ocean. It's set back from the ocean. Depends on, you know, what the glaciation thing is, the sea levels are. Could be as far as 100 miles or more from the ocean. But it's a giant cave, and humans have been occupying it for 50,000 years. So since they first really moved into the area, modern humans, and so then they're leaving these layers and layers and layers of debris. And in the debris, there's all sorts of cultural stuff, and that really helps us kind of understand what was going on. So at 40,000 feet, a layer of 40,000 feet years before the present, they found actually human remains. And this is, I don't know if it's the earliest, but it's among the earliest human remains, modern human remains, that have been found in Southeast Asia ever. It's 40,000 years, it's a long time ago. They also at this time, at the same level, found starch grains of yams. And it looks like they are Dioscorea elata, which is, they can't really identify it down to the genus and species, but they think it's either Dioscorea elata, which is it's called the greater yam. It's the yam we have growing in our garden right here. I had it on the picture up there. Or another one that we don't have, Dioscorea pentaphylla, but we should, because it was brought here. The Hawaiians had it. And then if you go down to about 30,000 years ago, there was starch grains from aroids, and it was ape and this swamp taro. So it looks like they were eating ape and swamp taro. This taro, what kind of taro? It's eaten all over. It's still in common use, and also yams. There probably were just foragers, though there's no evidence that they were actually cultivating these crops. But although there are, I think that they found tools that were used for clearing land. So there was some land clearing going, starting that. They were also great hunters. And if there's a list of all the animal bones, there's 60 different taxa of mammals and reptiles. So there's, they were eating crocodiles and boa constrictors, and there was these jungle cats, some kind of jaguar or something, and pangolins, and I mean, you could have a whole zoo with all these animals that they had in there. So they're obviously very skilled hunters, and it was a bountiful existence. Oops, yeah, there we go. The third site is the Solomon Islands site from about 30,000 years ago. Now modern humans came to the Bismarck Islands, which are these ones up here, about 40,000 years ago. And at that time, there was 110 miles of ocean between Bismarck and the closest Solomon Island, which is Bougainville. But within 10,000 years, they made the trip. Probably the longest open ocean voyage that had been made to date. Probably set the record for its day. And it was the land was out of sight. They couldn't see that island. So there's a really, really big adventure. So it obviously had some maritime skills going. The people that moved over here, and they moved up here to this north end of what's now Bougainville Island, and there's a cave there called Kilu Cave, and in that they found evidence of that they were using and processing Colocasia esculenta. That's the genus and species of the taro that we have in our garden today. And they found starch grains and phytoliths, not phytoliths, raphides. the little needle-like cells and stuff like that. So taro was definitely being used here, and from the wear analysis, they can see what they're doing with their tools. They were clearing forest, and then they were scraping and pounding and cutting taro. So it's, again, to stop short of cultivation or of farming, but they said, well, maybe cultivation without domestication. So it's a step on the way to full-blown agricultural activity. The third site is a site that got my attention back when I started working here. This was in the highlands of New Guinea. It's called Cook Swamp, and it's way up here. And what they found like 10,000 years ago. So we're come out of the these other was late Pleistocene. Now we're in the early Holocene. And at 10,000 years ago, they find taro and yam, and on tools that were used for cutting, mashing, and peeling. And they also have tools that were used for clearing. They're not. It's not certain that they were actually doing full-on agriculture. There's a lot of debate about that, but it's something very close to agriculture. And then by 7,000 years ago, which is really ancient times, they were building irrigation canals, raised beds, planting mounds. So definite agriculture was going. And they're also finding evidence of bananas and sugarcane. So you got the suite of crops: banana, sugarcane. There's one other thing too that didn't make it to Hawaii, and that is palm cabbage. So the core of palms is full of carbohydrates, and that was an important source of food for people all over island Southeast Asia. And so they find the starch grains from palm cabbages there too. So was this where taro was invented? The use of cultivated taro was invented. It's an early site. There were definitely farming taro, but what about these cultivars we have? So this is a different kind of paper that I read, and this is a DNA study, and the people set out. One of the things they set out to do was to figure out if the New Guinea Highlands taros was the original taro that all of our taro came from. So if you look at this. What they did in the DNA, they found that they had 178, I think, samples collected worldwide. Every place you see, and these are names: Hawaii, Fiji, Australia, Papua New Guinea, Japan, and so forth. The size of the circle is the number of samples they got from that area. They found that they broke down into 3 clades. And the DNA analysis, rather than doing genus and species, they do things in clades. It doesn't do away with the whole genus and species idea, but it gives you a very accurate idea of related groups of plants and their families. So there are 3 distinct clades. They call them clade 1, clade 2, and clade 3. Clade 3 is in green here, and you can see the greens kind of stop in this area. There's no green out in here. Clade 3, all the taro in clade 3, and there are a number of different variations in there, and they even had types within the clades. They're all wild taros. There are no cultivated taros. All the taro in clade 2, which is blue up here, are cultivated taros. But they're not the kind of cultivated taros we have in Hawaii. These are cultivated taros that grow in colder climates. And so you don't see them you see a few scattered here and there, but mostly in Japan, Pakistan, Nepal, New Zealand, places where it's cold. These are cold adapted taros. But all of the ones, if you're in that clade, they're all cultivated taros. There's no wild ones. They never found any wild ones. Clade 3, or clade 1, which is the orange, is a mix of wild and cultivated taros. And so, but the thing about it is that all the cultivated taros that we have here and the one we're familiar with are in clade 1. And but if you look over here and go, oh, they have wild taro, and they also had cultivated taro. All of this in Papua New Guinea is clade 1, type 1 is the types that we're growing, which are the cultivated taros. So they didn't find any samples of wild taros in that clade, which means that it would be very unlikely for them to have developed the types of taros that we're familiar with and are used all over the world under cultivation if there weren't any wild source for them to use to develop it. And so what the theory in this paper is that they were actually over in the Bay of Bengal area in things like Bangladesh and Thailand and Myanmar and Vietnam. There were wild clade ones and cultivated ones, and so I think somewhere in there is where the actual cultivated varieties began. And they were apparently ended up in Papua New Guinea too, so they got carried around. So we're gonna bring the Austronesians in pretty soon. But just to give you an idea, who was living in this area? Well, before they came, we had Papuans and Melanesians in the southeast areas, Austroasiatic and speakers. It's a language family, speakers in the Southeast Asia mainland. And then it's kind of uncertain. We had those other Australasian people, and there may have been Austroasiatic people in there, but can't really tell. A lot of these things are very hard in tropical areas to find evidence one way or the other of. So they definitely, in the aftermath of the Austronesians, there were Austroasiatic people in there, in speakers, well, they actually started speaking, but anyway, in living in island Southeast Asia. But we don't know if they came with the Austronesians or if they were there already. It's likely they were there already, actually. So before we got the Austronesians, before the Austronesians came, was there this kind of cultural zone? And what would make you think so? Well, if you go and look at this whole area, the basic diet is the same. It's taro, yams, bananas, sugarcane, palm cabbage, and there's a whole lot of other things too. There's a lot of nuts and things that we aren't familiar with. Pandanus nuts, there's canarium plant tree nuts. There's hundreds of cultivated plants or edible plants in this area, and they're common. There's other common things like the people tend forests of rattan and bamboo and use them for building and for making tools all across this whole area. There's some tool making practices that are similar. So it looks like there was some kind of cultural diffusion going on in this area before the Austronesians came. And so somehow or another, you were getting cultivars that were developed in Myanmar over to Papua New Guinea. And so there may well be, it's not a settled question, but there may well be that the Austronesians, when they came, weren't the first ones to bring in a bunch of these innovations. So where did they come from? There were people growing millet up here about 10,000, 11,000 years ago, and rice down here. And there was a movement in general down the coast. There were some people that grew rice only and millet only, and some had rice and millet. So some of the rice and millet people split off and moved over to Taiwan about 6,000 years ago. And this is the island of Taiwan here. And within about 1,000 years, they had occupied the whole island, and they had planted rice and millet all in the highlands, and then along the coastal areas, they were foraging and fishing and things like that too. It was a very quick expansion. And then about 4,500 years ago or so, actually these were the Austronesian people and Austronesian speakers. They were distinct from the people that were living on the mainland at that time. So, a subgroup or something there related to the Han. These were mostly Han type people that had moved down in here. But they had the Austronesian language is over here, and it's divided into 9 languages. And they went down here. The last one is called Proto-Maleo-Polynesian. And that is the mother of all that whole huge area on the map. They're all Maleo-Polynesian languages. And they all came from a little group, apparently, that lived right down here at the tip, or maybe even on the islands off the tip of here. And about 4,500, they got tired of, they say, oh, we were getting pushed off. We're just getting out of here. So what triggered this? And, it's got to say that the development of this unique and fabulous maritime technology that went on was one of the main triggers. And this is a picture of an outrigger canoe, and it's the outrigger canoe. Basically, we think that the Austronesians invented the outrigger canoe. And this kind of facilitated this whole sudden expansion. So this is one here, and if you know outrigger canoes, you may, like me, have wondered, turn this thing off here so I can get the regular thing up here, how they come about, because on an outrigger canoe, the outrigger has always got to be on the windward side of the boat. So that means you can't like come about like you do on a monohull regular boat. So these guys give us a little demonstration of how you come about in an outrigger canoe. This is in Palau. Yeah. So, yeah, it's ingenious, isn't it? And so this is just this fabulous innovation that the Austronesians came up with. And there's another when the Indo-Europeans came up with the bullock cart, the wheeled cart. Suddenly had this sudden expansion from there. It went all over Europe and Asia. This is a new form of transportation. Likes have not been seen of this ever before. You look at the boats, the contemporary boats. There's a Phoenician ship. They were great sailors. They went all over the place. But these things sailed like barges, basically. You could go downwind with them, but tacking into the wind, that's why you had all these the rowers along. And I mean, would you rather crew on one of these or one of these? You think about, who has a better job. So, and these not only are they big and cumbersome and slow, but they take a lot of, they didn't have capital then, but a tremendous amount of effort to build them, huge timbers, you had to be wealthy to be able to do this. The outrigger canoe, the basis of it is a dugout canoe. Here's the oldest dugout. People were building dugout canoes forever. And in Southeast Asia, they had plenty of dugout canoes. And what you do, and this is an Austronesian innovation, you add strakes, which are sideboards, to your dugout canoe. And they had this. They also invented this technique for lashing things together. So they use nails or mortise and tenon type of stuff. But it was all lashed together. So You just add some strakes to the side of your dugout and end caps, a piece in the prow, a piece in the stern, and tie on your outriggers, and Bob's your uncle. Yeah, you can sail. So you really could start with what you had already, and it was a fairly easy. I mean, I couldn't do it, but it's a fairly simple technology. It's not like building something like that where you'd have to go to Ptolemaic school or something like a University of Ptolemy, but this you could do it, and all of a sudden you'd be able to go fishing way out to sea, places that were unattainable before. You could go out there, and with just 2 people in a little boat like that, you get way the heck out to sea, and come back in a single day. You could go to different islands that were around nearby islands for foraging, or maybe to move and camp in for a while, but you would be within reach of your home village. You could, if you wanted to build a big one, if you had access to large logs, you could build big outrigger canoes and go on trading voyages or raiding voyages. So it opened this whole world up all of a sudden, and it was within reach of the people that the Austronesians were stopping and visiting at. So it's just this tremendous innovation. And I was thinking this today. We talk about the legacy of the Austronesian people. Could you imagine how much, this is real speculation. It's a just so story, but the level of joy or happiness in your life if suddenly you had this totally cool boat that you could go, that you could sail. You get up in the morning and say, wow, no wonder I'm living on this island here, I can go anywhere I want, and I can go out and fish, and it's just a wonderful thing. Got one more. And then of course on these, oops, I gotta do this, here we go. So for, if you want to get around that, having to shift fore and aft when you come about and just come about like we're used to. I don't know if that was really a factor in those days, probably not. But you can have an outrigger on each side, and then you can have a fixed mast. And then when you get big and fancy, you have a catamaran. So this totally cool new technology that was brought by the Austronesians. So let's look a bit at this map again. I want to especially look at that's okay. At the route they took when they came to Polynesia. So they start, let me get my pointer going here. Oops, can't do them both, I guess. Okay. Well, I won't do them both. I'd rather have the magnifying and use my fingers.
Want a big stick?
That's okay. I got. So, and if this map you see is in AD and BC, so you really have to switch thinking to go. But anyway, about 4,500 years ago to 4,000 years ago, they leave Taiwan and head out this direction here. Some interesting excursions. This is we're talking about almost 4,200 all the way over to the Marianas Islands. So that's Guam and stuff. So they were settled a long time ago. But then come down here through the Philippines. They probably were already doing fishing trips down to the Philippines anyway. But through the Philippines and down to, and kind of ended up stopping in Bismarck Archipelago and Solomon Islands down there. And that whole trip took about 1,000 years. I mean, they weren't just going as fast as they could or anything like that, but they spent about 1,000 years in that migration down to the Bismarck and Solomon Islands. And then they stayed there for about 400 or 500 years. So what were they doing? For one thing, they were not empire building. There was never an Austronesian empire. And they did not get assimilated into the areas where they stayed. They the people ended up speaking their language. They didn't speak these other. They didn't change their language. They're still speaking Austronesian when they came down here 1,000 years later, or Proto-Malay, Polynesian, whatever. They may have been raiders and traders, kind of like the Vikings. That's one theory, and it kind of makes sense to me. Like the Vikings, where they would raid when the opportunity was there, and they would trade. They had trade items, but also they would settle and farm when they found a good place to settle and farm, either alongside the inhabitants or in new places too. So, but in any case, they spent 1,000 years, and by that time, if there was anything they didn't know when they left about farming taro and sugarcane and bananas and yams when they left Taiwan, they sure knew it by the time they got down here. And they spent another 400 years or so sitting around the Bismarcks and Solomons, and then they came out to Samoa and Tonga. And this is about 3,000 years ago. I'm talking about when they landed in Samoa and Tonga and settled there. And they had to call it the long pause, spent 1,500 years without really moving further into Oceania there at that point. But in the course of that time, they went from being these real this clear link in culture between Taiwan and the people that settled in the Solomons. And the special link that everybody knows about is they're the Lapita people, and they had this incised pottery that you could trace the pottery all the way back up there. After 1,500 years in Samoa, they had changed. They had really developed a new kind of culture, and they didn't make pottery anymore. They were the Polynesians, and so that's a long time. 1,500 years, a lot happens, and so in that time, and then at about 700 A.D., about 1,500 years ago, they sailed out into, they call it Far Oceania, including all these places: Hawaii, Rapa Nui, Marquesas, Cook Islands, Society Islands, and New Zealand. And meanwhile, they weren't. That wasn't all they were doing. Turn that off. They were also heading off into Borneo and then out all the way over to Madagascar. They brought, and there's a lot of debate about this, but it's kind of clear they probably brought these things, whether they were the first ones ever, but probably the Asian yam, like our yam, to Africa, coconuts, taro, sugarcane, and bananas. And like I said, you could, I'm sure you get a good argument from a lot of people about that. But anyway, they brought a heck of a lot to Africa too. Don't think of that as as being so connected with Hawaii, but it is. So what's the legacy? Just in general, of course, this language, there are 325 million people who speak Austronesian languages today. So it's the 5th largest language family in the world. The area it was until English came along and was forced on people all over the world. They had the biggest geographical area covered by a single language family. So language it was a big thing. The sailing technology, people everywhere from Africa to Rapa Nui were sailing in outriggers after the Austronesians came. And it didn't stop there. It got up into the Arabian Peninsula and India. It actually really facilitated this new burst of trade between India and Africa, because they had boats that could handle the monsoons and could make those trips and stuff. So tremendous influence, even beyond the areas where they actually were and settled. But there's also their genetic influence. And so this is an interesting map because it kind of shows you the percentage of Austronesian and other groups other in the different areas that they travel through. Now, just to, so if you look up here, here's the Philippines. These are those other Australasian peoples that I mentioned. So in the Philippines, you know, you have the Tagalog speakers are like 95% Austronesian, with some of the native Australasians that they encountered when they moved here. But all these people, lots of Austronesian and some of the Australasians. Okay, and then if you go down over here to Java and Sumatra and Malay Peninsula and so forth, then you got a mix between the Austroasiatic speakers, who now they all become Austronesian speakers, but these are the people that had been happily up here, you know, speaking their own language family, and Austronesians. And then there's a mix, a little bit of mix of the other Australasians. Then down here and over here, this is Sunda and Spice Islands area here. There's a three-way mix sometimes: the Austroasiatic speakers, the Australasians, and the Austronesians. Yeah, I'm just keeping all three of those straight. But anyway, you can see Austronesian is pretty big. Over here we get, and here's these people here too are Papuan Melanesian. And so the Polynesian people are actually, for the most part, probably about 80% of their genetic makeup is from the Austronesian people, the ones that came from Taiwan, and 20% from the Papuan people. Anyway, I think that's it. Yeah.